Good day, esteemed professors, senior colleagues, organizing committee members of the conference, ladies and gentlemen. My colleagues and I studied liquid waste management in Nigerian Bureau, and it is a perception-based study. My name is Tolulope Ajebiwe, and I'll be making this presentation on their behalf. I am a student at the Middle East Technical University, Ankara, Turkey, where I study for a PhD in urban policy planning and local governments. This presentation is structured thus. The introduction gives general overview of the study, talks about the aim of the study and the objective of the study, and then the theory of waste management was explored to understand exactly what the study is all about. Then the materials and methods the study used in achieving the aim and the objective of the study, and then it will come to a conclusion after looking at the analysis of results, the discussion of the results, recommendation, and conclusion. With no further ado, it will be important to trace the journey back to the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 1760s in Europe. And this time there were a series of events that are still with us today, one of them being the rise of cities. And during this time, there were also the cases of new industrial areas coming up, which became sources of wealth for migrants, working class neighborhoods. And then we would also see then that these industries had an adverse effect on the neighborhood in terms of them being crowded and polluted. And then in the 19th century, there were attempts that came to the fore to regulate workers' welfare and waste management. So, in the case of Nigeria, the story is also not far-fetched from accounts of industrialization that have been induced by rapid urbanization. Urban centers in Nigeria, like never before, are now being compelled to accommodate a teeming population. And what we see nowadays is that there have been an increase in industrial development, which also has two sides to it. It is beneficial for a thriving economy like the one we have, and at the same time, this rise in industrial development is detrimental to the environment through environmental pollution from the waste these industrial areas or industries generate. And so, despite the economic contribution of industrial development to urban centers, it is important that we note that the waste generation and management of waste by these industries shouldn't be neglected for reasons ranging from human health to environmental. The efforts at managing industrial waste and pollution in developing countries are, of course, still at its embryonic stages, and there have been arguments in favor of this notion. Some have come to say that, in fact, developed countries see environmental concern as a ploy to prevent poor nations from industrializing and to keep them forever sources of essential supplies for the continual development and prosperity of the industrial countries. A number of developing countries have argued back and forth on this same issue, and what we've seen over the years is that most of them would say that if pollution meant industrialization, of course, they would wholeheartedly welcome pollution. So, what we see also is that in most developing countries, the commitment for economic development has reigned most supreme to the detriment of a safe commitment to the environment, a safe commitment to the planet. In the Nigerian case, I should also add that there have been a liturgy of regulations, policies, and agencies that have been in place since the 1980s. And more often than not, what we also see is that emitted industrial waste find their resting place in the environment either by a deliberate or accidental emission of these industries. On your screen, there are two pictorials. The one on the left shows a drainage channel bordering the brewery, which is the industry the study area was conducted. And the one on your right shows the river that collects the effluent discharged by this industry. So in Nigeria, there has been a serious environmental problems and health concerns in recent years. Yet there has been little information on waste constituents and waste management in industrial. Ultimately, the aim of the study was to investigate residents' perception of liquid waste management in the Nigerian Bureau, Ibadan, with the view of assessing the perceived effects of waste management strategies adopted by the industry. To achieve this aim, we explored two objectives. The first one being to investigate residents' understanding of liquid waste management, and then we went a step further to analyze water samples from point of discharge to adjoining surface water body and groundwater in all to determine the physical chemical quality of the water samples. And the research input is in the sense that what we'll see is that in municipalities, public water supply system are either moribund or have not for a very long time be at an effective capacity, and as such residents resort to privately dug wells and boreholes for their sources of water supply. And this sometimes exposes them to waste contaminated water, and it is thus important to conduct a research geared towards safeguarding the population. The paper is hinged on the proposition of the theory of waste management, which is also an evolving theory. And this theory entails the strategic planning, prevention of the contamination of environment, and conservation of resources, etc. The implication of the theory on the study is that it provided us a basis for assessing whether or not the case study adhered religiously to waste management provisions, and since liquid waste generated and disposed were compared to standards. In Nigeria, the National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency have been saddled with the task and responsibility of checkmating the disposal of liquid waste. And these agencies, many more agencies, we have those that have been set up by the state government, municipalities, and even the federal government. And they've focused for so long on solid waste and paid limited attention to liquid waste. And this has aroused lamentations from both environmental and public health commentators. Some have even gone ahead to say that the government of the day have paid a lesser fair attitude to liquid waste management in Nigeria. Um, on your screen, the pictorials you see on your screen tries to give a geographical context and understanding to the study. And on your left is the map of Nigeria, which shows Oyo State in the context of Nigeria and Africa, and then Ibadan in the context of Oyo State, and then the Ibadan Bureau and the adjoining neighborhood where the study was conducted. You would see a dispatch and distribution of red dots, which signifies and indicates the respondents that were sampled for the study. The study adopted a descriptive survey research design, and it's in two layers. The geographical scope of the study, which is the industry, where the first layer being the industry, where the study was conducted, and the second layer being the residential buildings that are within a kilometer radius of the industry, as shown in the earlier pictorial. 4,300 buildings were accounted for to have fallen within this kilometer radius, and they were identified with the use of a geographic information system and were confirmed through ground truthing. Of this number of buildings, 5% of the residential buildings were selected to form 215 buildings that were selected on the whole. And then a systematic sampling was then used to administer questionnaire on waste management perception to residents at a 20 building interval. The wastewater samples, four liquid samples were collected using a 25 cl tube, and the first one was collected at the surface water runoff at the river, the pictorial I showed earlier on. The second one being at the point of discharge of the industry, and the last two being two hand dug wells that were 500 meters apart. The data collected were entered and analyzed using statistical packages like the SPSS version 17.0, and then the Likert Scale Respondent Agreement Index was adopted to analyze the perception of the residents. The physical-chemical characteristics of the water samples were also analyzed and based on some parameters like temperature, electrical conductivity of water, concentration of magnesium, cadmium, lead, etc. And the observed values were compared against the standard value sets by the World Health Organization and NESRI. These results were presented in charts and tables. The distribution of respondents based on personal characteristics such as age, gender, household size, level of education, and monthly income are displayed in the tables or on your screen. The age of respondents who were above the ages of 84 topped the chart to about 37.2 of the sampled population. And then respondents who were female also, about 53% of them were female. And this is indicative of the fact that at the time when the study was conducted, when the questionnaires were being administered, male household members were either in their places of work while the female household members were at home. There was little or no barrier in communicating with the respondents during the study because of their level of education. Respondents who had primary education were about 56%, and there were also instances, I should add, where it was difficult for respondents to understand the questions that were being asked. In those instances, we translated those or asked those questions in Yoruba language, which is the um, dialect that most locals in the study area spoke um, comfortably. In terms of the monthly income of the respondents who earn between 19,000 naira to 35,000 naira were about 47.9%. And the minimum wage of Nigeria, as at the time when the study was conducted, was about 18,000 naira. And we would see that because of this, because of respondents who earned in this income range, there's the likelihood that most of them will be more concerned about increasing their earning rather than the adverse effects of liquid waste in the environment. The perception on liquid waste management, there was the categorization of variables into six questions, six poser questions were asked. You will see in the table level of agreement, and this was done by comparing the mean with the weighted value x, and from the whole calculations that went into it, we gathered that respondents strongly agreed that liquid waste discharge can actually affect the quality of water, thus making it less potable. The greater the respondent's satisfactory index compared to the mean, the greater the level of agreement. Also, residents understood that industrial effluents are obnoxious to the environment. From the analysis of respondents' perception on liquid waste management, a number of challenges are faced by residents in the study area. The fact that the discharge affects the water quality is one of them. And interestingly, on the flip side, air pollution from the industrial activity also has an adverse effect on residents' health. And because scientifically the quality of water is not ascertained via subjective queries or perceptions, and as such, the study went a step further, like I mentioned earlier, to analyze the physical chemical characteristics of water samples. On the table, you will see the parameters that were employed. You'll also see standardized value sets by World Health Organization and nursery, and then you also see the observed values from the water samples. Also, the table on your screen shows the heavy metal concentration in water samples. Like I mentioned earlier, the parameters are there on the table, the acceptable values are there, and the observed values are as well there. So the analysis from the study revealed that well water is slightly acidic, while the surface water and wastewater is tending towards alkaline. However, the values were within the permissible limits of nursery and WHO. Regarding electrical conductivity, surface water and brewery effluent recorded above the permissible standard of WHO. The total soluble solid values were too high compared with the standard of nursery. This suggests that effluent from the industry is a likely cause of the increased value. The pH recorded across samples were also within the necessary permissible limits of less than 40 degrees Celsius. However, the whole samples were higher than that of the WHO, which can affect the water quality. Analysis from the study revealed that water adjoining the industry are not suitable for human consumption due to the heavy metal concentration in them, and this is in both parts due to the industry effluent and all the possible civic waste that are being deposited in the surface runoff water. In lieu of the data gathered and results obtained, the study concludes that the industry, that is Nigerian brewery, possesses an effluent treatment plant. The capacity of this plant, though undisclosed, but this plant is said to be functional and useful in mitigating hazards of liquid waste the industry generates. In terms of the residents' perception or on the effects of liquid waste management by the industry, the sampled population averred that the discharge of the effluent by the brewery affects the water quality and the air quality in the neighborhood. In corroborating this perception and the physical chemical tests conducted, the study concludes that there is in fact the contamination of surface water by the effluent, even though the groundwater was non-toxic and therefore safe for domestic purposes. The study then recommends that in mitigating liquid waste from having a negative impact on the environment and residents, it is better to propose ways of reducing the effect of liquid waste. Therefore, industries should adopt efficient preventive measures, best treatment option, and take into consideration legislation. They should also strictly adhere to standards and guidelines that have been set to ensure that there is a great reduction in the pollution of water bodies with harmful agents. As a way of complementing the efforts of industries, regulatory bodies like NISRI in Nigeria should routinely inspect and monitor industries' waste management plans. In the cases where industries do not possess these plans, they should mandate these industries to have one. This regulatory body should also follow through a religious implementation of these plans. In a rapidly urbanizing world, it has become imperative that the government of the day, public and other concerned institutions provide pipe-borne water as a source of drinking water for people. And this is also the case where the study recommends that in the case of Ibadan and virtually every other city in Nigeria, where there has been for a very long time an ineffective public water supply system. These moribund public water supply systems should be restructured so that they can provide access to potable water for residents. The study also recommends that there should be more attention should be paid to liquid waste management, because for a very long time there has been a plethora of studies, a plethora of policies on solid waste management to the detriment of liquid waste management. So the study recommends that there should be a holistic approach to looking at waste management so that liquid waste management is not just looked at in terms of industrial activities, but also in terms of the residential neighborhoods and residential hubs. On a final note, the study recommends that further studies can examine the air quality of neighborhood adjoining industries in Ibadan, Nigeria. Thank you very much for listening.